Hey guys, this is Woodshop Junkies and today I'm jumping back in with the restoration of my vintage Wadkin Bursgreen table saw. Now in case you are new to this restoration series, I'll quickly run through all the work I've done on the saw up until now before jumping into today's video. A few months ago, a beat up Wadkin Bursgreen saw turned up in my local marketplace. I bought it with the hopes of restoring it so I can use it in my shop. A project I think I underestimated because I had zero experience restoring stuff, so I was pretty much learning as I go along. I started by stripping the saw down to its bare components so I can take stock of the work to be done. Also swapped out the original 3-phase motor for a single-phase motor so I could use the machine here in my shop. I then did a little bit of restoration work on the top because it was discolored and had deposits like paint on it. After that I had all the old paint stripped off by sandblasting and a crack in the cast iron repaired by a professional welder. Most recently I gave all the components a coat of automotive primer to prevent them from rusting while I figure out a paint scheme. All of these videos are available on the playlist and will be linked below. Now for months I've been thinking about how I should paint the saw, and I was torn between the original green or a paint scheme inspired by my logo colors. Eventually I decided to go for a third completely different option. I decided to go with a hammered finish because I think a hammered finish would work well with the already rough surface of the cast iron. And for those who don't know what a hammered finish is, it's a type of paint that cures with a rough surface, kind of like the metal was beat with a hammer. To help me decide on a color scheme, I took an off-cut piece of flat bar and gave it a coat of primer. I then sprayed samples onto it in a way that would allow me to compare it to the saw and visualize the saw in that color scheme. Eventually I decided on a monochromatic color scheme with the main color being a charcoal grey. Now the idea is to paint most of the saw in a charcoal hammer tone and then small accents in a different shade, maybe even black or white. Now in a perfect world I wouldn't be doing this in my dusty workshop, but I didn't have much of a choice. Luckily hammered paint is a bit more forgiving on small imperfections because of its rough texture. Now as I mentioned in one of my previous restoration videos, spray painting is very new to me. I don't have a lot of experience and at this point in the project I run the risk of undoing months of work. So I'm going to start slow with some of the smaller components and work my way up to the bigger ones. I suspended the components to give me 360-degree access and so cover the entire component with paint. To be able to spray the hammered paint I had to dilute it slightly with 10 to 15% thinners. The hammered paint was easier to spray than I expected, so I jumped right in with the saw housing. Now to assemble the saw I'm swapping out all the original bolts with high tensile Allen cap or hex key bolts. The reason for this is many of them are located close to a side panel and sometimes it's a bit tricky getting a wrench in there. Also I think the black color on the high tensile bolts will work better with the paint job. The tape to prevent the machined areas getting paint on it was still in place from when I did the primer coat. After the top coat had cured, I removed the tape. Right, so with the main body of the saw pretty much assembled, I can get started on the mechanism. Now, as I mentioned in my previous restoration video, many of the fasteners or components like this I am unable to source locally. So I gave it a good soak in a rust removing chemical so I can reuse it. The rust removing soak was done a day before assembly to allow for a 24-hour soak. Now, though I don't show it, I put small amounts of grease on all the surfaces where steel would be moving over steel. With all the components cleaned up, they went together a lot easier than they came apart when I was stripping. I replaced the bearings on the spindle assembly, and to knock them in place I used a piece of copper pipe to avoid damaging the bearing and the bearing seal. Now I'm installing the spindle without the riving knife bracket, so I'm going to have to take it apart again to install the bracket once I have a replacement. after straightening and securing the top, I cleaned it up with some thinners and ran it over with a Scotch-Brite pad and some penetrating oil. Okay guys, so the next and final addition in this video is the sign, and for the sign I went with black. I sprayed the sign with a black hammer tone paint so that the finish or the texture would match the rest of the saw. As for the black and bare metal color scheme, it is to match the already installed data plate, the angle indicator and the newly installed motor. Now to get the raised letters like this, I used a technique that I used when I painted the primer coat of the saw, by painting the entire sign one color and sanding down the raised parts of the letters. But if you watched that video, you will remember it didn't work out so well because the shavings that came off the raised parts of the letters stained the rest of the paint. One of the viewers on that video mentioned that this won't be the case with the top coat and I'll just be able to wipe it clean. I took his advice and I'm glad I did, because it turned out beautifully and it gave me a much better edge than I would have gotten if I covered all the raised letters with tape. So after the paint dried, I used a piece of sandpaper fixed to a large-ish block to help with stability. To clean up these smaller stubborn areas, I used a much smaller block to allow me to focus on those areas. Finally, I did a quick run over with a high grit paper just to smooth it out a bit. But that's going to have to be it for this video. There is still a few details outstanding before I can start using the saw, like the height and angle adjustment handles, the blade insert, the fence, the riving knife bracket and the electricals. But by the next video I'll definitely have the saw ready to be used. If you want to see that and you aren't subscribed yet, you should do that now. The saw has come a long way and so far I'm quite pleased with the results. Despite my lack of experience, I think the paint job turned out okay. But I would love to hear what you guys think and if I should have done anything differently, so please drop a comment down below. But that is going to have to be it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. Till next time. Cheers.